In the 1960s, the New York Yankees' dominance would finally end, but not before cherished old records fell to new and complicated heroes. The Los Angeles Dodgers would break all attendance records in their new home and would win 2 world championships, while 4 weeks of inspired hitting by a determined outfielder would drive the Boston Red Sox to within a game of realizing their 48-year-old dream. 2 pitchers would dominate the decade, an imposing right-hander so aggressive that batters were terrified to stand in against him, and a shy, soft-spoken left-hander who began his career with precious little control and then turned himself into perhaps the finest pitcher of all time. The players would begin to challenge the authority of the owners, and one of the worst teams in baseball history would be transformed for a moment into the best. For the first time, baseball would move inside, and almost all of the old ballparks would be demolished. For the first time, football would seriously challenge baseball as the national pastime, and some began to wonder if the game mattered at all. By the 1960s, Americans were deserting the big cities for the Sun Belt and West Coast in record numbers. Impressed with the profits the Dodgers and Giants were making in California, Major League Baseball decided to expand, adding 4 new teams. With the birth of the Los Angeles Angels in 1961, the American League Two finally stretched all the way to the Pacific. The new team would soon move to Anaheim and become the California Angels. Meanwhile, Cal Griffith moved his battered Senators out of Washington, west to Bloomington, Minnesota, where they became the Twins. A new version of the Senators moved into D.C. Stadium, but fared little better than their predecessors. 11 years later, they would move to Arlington, Texas, and become the Texas Rangers. The national game would no longer be played in the nation's capital. The National League added 2 new teams, the New York Metropolitans and the Colt 45s, who began a 3-year stint in a temporary park in Houston, Texas, braving heat, humidity, and ravenous mosquitoes until their all-weather stadium could be built. For baseball and the country, times were changing fast. By 1961, Curt Flood had become one of the most valuable players on August Bush's St. Louis Cardinals. Although baseball had led the way in integration 14 years before, Flood and his black teammates had to endure the segregated facilities and persistent racism that still plagued black ball players and black Americans alike. By the time Maris had hit 4 home runs, Mantle had 10. But in midsummer, Maris surged ahead, slamming 24 home runs in 38 games.
Stallard pitch.
Here's the windup. Fastball hit deep to right. This could be it. Way back there. Holy cow! 61 to Maris.
But even this triumph soured, because the new, longer season had provided Maris 8 more games in which to hit than Ruth had been given. Baseball Commissioner Ford Frick suggested that an asterisk appear next to Maris's name in the record books. But Commissioner Ford Frick was alarmed by all the big hitting that year. The Yankees had slugged an all-time record 240 home runs, and now he overreacted. He convinced the club owners to widen the strike zone to ensure that home runs did not come too cheaply. The result? would be a golden age for pitchers. Koufax had to apply massive heat to his arm before every game, then plunge it in ice water after it was over. But he did not argue with umpires, did not throw at batters, engaged in no theatrics. He'll strike you out, an opposing batter said, but he won't embarrass you. Now, nothing seemed to stop him. For 5 years, he dominated the National League, winning 5 ERA titles, pitching 4 no-hitters, winning the Cy Young Award 3 times, despite persistent, excruciating pain from an elbow permanently damaged before he had learned to pace himself.
The windup, Sandy delivers, swing and a miss, he struck him out.
He pitched a no-hitter every year from 1962 to 1965. In 1965 alone, he struck out 382 batters, 33 more than his nearest competitor, Rube Waddell, had in 1904.
The Dodgers lead him 4-0. Here's Mickey Mantle. Now the windup by Sandy. He delivers. It's a strike call. The 4th straight strikeout for Sandy Koufax.
Casey Stengel believed him the best pitcher in baseball history. "Forget the other fellow," he said, meaning Walter Johnson. "You can forget Waddell. The Jewish kid is probably the best of them." Far from the spotlight of New York, Stan Musial, soft-spoken and utterly dependable, had powered the St. Louis Cardinals for 22 years. He led the league in hitting 7 times, once batting .376. Beginning in 1948, he turned himself into a great home run hitter, hitting 475 of them over the course of his long career. He liked the name. Manager Sparky Anderson once said, "He's the best thing to happen to the game since, well, the game." He wasn't. Robinson moved to Baltimore, where in his first season he won the American League's Triple Crown and became that league's most valuable player. No other player has ever won the award in both leagues. Once, early in Robinson's career, when Branch Rickey had desperately wanted him for the Pirates, the Reds' general manager said, "I wouldn't give you Frank Robinson for your whole team."
It wasn't just that he was the triple champ. It was that in every clutch situation, when he came up, you knew he wanted to be there. You could watch him straining to hit that ball because you knew he wanted to be a hero.
Hot summer in the city, back of my neck getting dirt and gritty. Bend down, isn't it a pity? Doesn't seem to be a shadow in the city. All around, people looking half dead, walking on the sidewalk harder than a match here. But at night it's a different world. Go out and find a girl. Come on and dance all night. Despite the heat, it'll be alright. Don't you know it's a pity the days can't be like the nights in the summer, in the city, in the summer, in the city.
It was the tightest race in American League history, with Boston, Detroit, Minnesota, and Chicago all in contention. In the Red Sox final 12 games, Yastrzemski batted .523 with 23 hits, 5 home runs, and 16 RBIs.
Base hit to center. Lonborn scores. Adair will score. It's tied up.
Yastrzemski's hit ignited a Boston rally. They surged ahead of the Twins, scoring 3 more runs.
The pitch is looped towards shortstop. Petrocelli's back. He's got it. The Red Sox win.
Now, Gibson would face Carl Yastrzemski in the 1967 World Series.
Bob Gibson's first pitch to Yastrzemski. Here's the pitch. He swung at a base hit out of the right field.
Yastrzemski continued his tear, hitting .400, smashing 3 home runs, and in one game driving in 4 of Boston's 5 runs. But Bob Gibson overwhelmed nearly every other Red Sox hitter.
Gibson set. Here's the pitch. Strike 3.
Despite an aching elbow, he won the first game, took 3 days off, then won the 4th.
He struck him out swinging.
Three days later, he was called in again to pitch the 7th against Boston's best, Jim Lonborg, who had also won his 2 games, but who was starting with only 2 days rest.
Now the big of Bob Gibson. The pitch by Lonborg. One on, a long drive, deep left center, way back. It might be out of here. It is a home run for Bob Gibson.
Gibson won it easily, 7-2, and added insult to injury by hitting a home run of his own.
Joins the list of pitchers who hit home runs in World Series competition.
In 3 complete series games, he gave up just 14 hits, something no one else had done since Christy Mathewson in 1905. Weaver was a brilliant psychologist. He loved debate umpires to inspire his team. And he was thrown out of 91 games, a major league record.
Yeah, I will. Oh, good. Don't think I won't. Your finger off. You hit me. You do it again, and I'll knock you right in your nose. I didn't touch you. You wished your finger. I did not. Now you're lying. You're lying. No, you are. You are lying. You're a big liar. You are a liar, Earl. You are a liar. You are. You had your hands on me. Now that's wrong, Earl. Wrong.
Smile on your brother, everybody get together. Try to love one another right now. Come on, people now. Smile on your brother, everybody get together. Try to love one another right now.
The Orioles were good at everything. In addition to the power hitting of Frank Robinson, they had the incomparable third baseman Brooks Robinson, who would win 16 straight Gold Glove awards and set major league records for games, putouts, assists, and double plays. But it was their pitchers that set them apart. And to Earl Weaver was a genius at coaxing fine performances from each one. In 1968, pitchers dominated as never before. 1 out of every 5 games played that year was a shutout. Bob Gibson was again the most fearsome performer.
2 strikes and a ball. Got him!
He pitched 13 shutouts, won 22 games, and registered the lowest ERA in the history of his league, 1.12.
Standing ovation. All by himself. He got it! Struck him out! A new world record of 17 strikeouts in 1 game.
Bob Gibson is the only pitcher to win 7 consecutive World Series starts, each of them a complete game. As expected, the Mets lost the first game 4-1, but they came back to take the second behind the brilliant pitching of Jerry Koosman. And then the Orioles came to Shea Stadium, where the Mets and 56,000 of their fans were waiting for them. New York won the 3rd game 5-0, thanks to the pitching of Gary Gentry and Nolan Ryan, and some spectacular help from center fielder Tommy Agee.
And it is a fly ball. It'll be tough to get to. Agee is going, and Agee makes it down. He's out. There's a drive into deep left center. Racing hard is Agee. What a grab! Well, Agee raised 2 runs.
In the 4th game, Tom Seaver outpitched Mike Cuellar, this time with some spectacular help from right fielder Ron Swoboda.
And there's a drive to right center. Swoboda comes up with it. The tag is third. Here comes Ron Swoboda making another sensational catch for the Mets.
To everyone's amazement, the Mets now led the series 3-1. They needed just 1 more victory. But the next day, the Orioles took an early 3-0 lead. Then, in the bottom of the 6th inning, Cleon Jones of the Mets alleged he had been hit in the foot by pitcher Dave McNally.
Come alive here.
Next up was Don Clendenin. His home run into the left field stands scored Jones and brought the Mets to within 1 run.
Third home run of the 1969 World Series, and that time McNally pitched. McNally ahead 0-1. Fastball, here's a fly ball out to right center field. Buford going back. Buford at the warning track. It is over the fence for a home run.
In the 7th, Al Weiss, normally an easy out, somehow managed to hit a home run to tie up the game.
This game has 3 runs apiece.
In the bottom of the 8th, 2 Met doubles and 2 costly Baltimore errors put New York ahead for good.
Two-one pitch, fly ball, deep left field. Jones is back to the fence.